And I think we're going to get started at this point. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where in the world you are. Thank you very much for joining this webinar, sponsored by IoTahoe and held in conjunction with Forrester. We will be talking this morning about the total economic impact of IoTahoe. I'm Steve Friedberg, and we are joined by a veritable who's who here. We have from Forrester, Michele Goetz, a principal analyst, and Amy Harrison, a senior TEI consultant. Good morning, folks.
Good morning, Steve.
I hope all is well. And over at IoTahoe, we have the co-founders, Oksana Sokolovsky and Rohit Mahajan, respectively, the CEO and the Chief Technical and Product Officer for the company. Good morning, guys.
Hey, morning, Steve. How are you doing?
Good morning.
Fantastic. And howdy. So in order to maximize our time together and get as much information as we possibly can, just one bit of quick housekeeping. Folks, as who are attendees, if you have any questions, please type them in the box. We'll be happy to try to get to as many as we can toward the bottom of our time together. In the meantime, I'm going to turn this over to Michele, and I'm going to let you take it from there.
Great, thank you. So today what we're going to do is a few things. I want to give you some things to be thinking about of ways to get in control of all of your data. And then we want to be able to demonstrate how investments in the right technologies enable you to do so and to ensure that you're getting value from your data, that you're able to get the proper insights, you can take those insights to action, and that those actions have real financial results as well as efficiency results for your organization. So what I'm going to start with is talk about the mounting pressure of data on your business. Let's just set up a little bit of the context. We'll go into, how do you meet the expectations of your business stakeholders as well as, potentially your customers and your partners. Take a look at what's causing you to kind of fall behind a little bit, or maybe not get quite as much out of your data as you have expected. And then lastly, we'll tie this up with a pretty bow to look at how technology and data cataloging and specifically enables data value and results. We have heard enough about the big data Vs, right? It's been such a cliche. It's been a fear tactic to get us to open our eyes and wake up to, the onslaught of information that is coming at us. And it was sort of the back end of where the information age has taken us. But the reality is that for enterprises, the big data Vs are no longer a cliche. And when we dive into this, let's kind of break this down. First, let's start off with volume and variety. From you, as enterprises and data professionals, you are seeing this growth. From 2016 to 2017, the volume of information has tripled and the variety of information has tripled. You're not just bringing in structured, event-based transactional data from your applications anymore. Devices are allowing you to see where your customers are at, what they're doing, how they're sharing and talking and collaborating with their friends and their colleagues online, if they're taking pictures of things and your products. That's all coming into you, as well as all of the type of information that you use to run your business behind the scenes, managing around your emails, any sort of documents, contracts that you may have with your partners that are all very important to ensuring that you are running your business at its best. It all runs on data. And the velocity of this information, we can't shy away from either. Certainly with devices, mobile tablets, your phones. Everybody's walking around, looking at our phones today, sometimes driving with our phones, which we know we shouldn't be doing. But what this means is that we need to be taking advantage of data in real time. We need to keep pace with our customers and our market and our competition. And so in recognition of this velocity, we're already starting to see significant investments in our ability to capture streaming information and turning that into insights that we can take action on. Typically, where our investments begin to get a hold of our data and not struggle under the big data V's is build a data lake. If we can bring all of our information together into one place where we know where to go, a trusted environment, we think that we can start the pursuit of those insights and the value that data provides to us. On average, leading organizations will have 8 data lakes. Why so many? Well, first of all, if you think about the number of data sources in your organization, you can have hundreds, if not thousands and tens of thousands of databases, marts, applications, warehouses, mainframe environments. It's all around us, and we know we're trying to rationalize. The fact that we can get it down into 8 data lakes is actually a pretty good thing. And where we orient these data lakes is around very specific value streams within our business. Think about your supply chain. Think about engineering. Thinking about customer engagement from your customer support centers to your marketing and your sales channels. All of these data lakes are providing less rigid environments to really explore information, discover new insights, and be able to take those insights forward in meaningful ways. And what this is allowing us to do is having environments that really create a personalized experience with our data. It's no longer adequate to have a one-size-fits-all business intelligence strategy where essentially what you're doing is only looking at your business through the rear-view mirror and seeing what have I done, how have I engaged with customers, how am I driving revenue, and am I hitting my targets. That's a lot of kind of looking at what levers should I be pulling. But today we want to know, why is the business running the way that it does? If we're building forecasts, what are all of the variables or events that are going to impact that? We want to understand more of the nuances behind our customer behaviors. What are their intents? What are their needs? Where are they influenced, for example? And so each one of us, as we interact with data, comes up with our own questions. We're all amazingly creative and inquisitive in the way that we want to see our business, and our data has to fit that model. You can't put 2 marketers side by side each other and think that they're going to ask the same questions of their business. They're not, because they have different goals. Just like as we talked about with those data lakes, there are going to be different questions, different insights, different decisions that need to be made if you're building your products versus taking those products to market. But data lakes don't solve the entire problem. It gives us a way to rationalize our environment and maybe reduce our cost and overhead of managing our data and particularly data at rest. But that personalized experience is still really hard. That last mile of delivery is where we tend to fall down. So those stakeholders who are trying to get answers and insights from information have a lot of work still on their hands. To access those data lakes, make sense of the information within those environments, and prepare that information so that they can run the analysis and be able to make much better and more informed decisions. So number one, merging all of this existing information together, while data lakes start that process, data lakes don't over-model and over-define the data because you want to have a certain amount of personalization. You want to have different questions. So business users and analysts, whether they're analysts or data scientists or the average business user in a department, is going to have to do some of their own sourcing and merging information together, and they're trying to do that in context of their own business processes. And number two, just the act of having to munch through that data is really very difficult. And if you think about it, if you can't tackle that last mile with data, your data is just going to sit there and it's not going to provide value. Democratization of data and insights is really critical. And this is where we see that data lakes are struggling, and the adoption of data lakes is not necessarily translating into turning data into business value and business outcomes. Many data lakes are sitting idle, and what we're seeing between 2018 and 2019 is a third of those data lakes are actually being taken off life support. So, you know, those investments are not getting returns, and in fact, they're not getting returns because they don't have the proper adoption. It's still too hard to work with the data. We need to make data work. And so when we look at the broader landscape of how organizations and enterprises like you are making investments, certainly they're trying to take into account how do you govern information, how do you rapidly and adaptively steward that information, all in order to make sense of that data. So the first place is, how do you take data lakes and make them more accessible? Well, you put them on the cloud, because everybody can interact and operate with information in the cloud. You can spit up new data, them down. You can spin up new analytic environments and spin them down. Everything is responsive to where the value of data is going to come from, and moving into the cloud allows you to take the data and the insights upstream into your systems of engagement and systems of automation. So the cloud service provider is always going to determine the next set of investments, which next comes in security and analytics. Obviously, we need data protection, and we don't need security breaches. We don't need to be on the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal that we had a significant breach in our data, because that, you know, causes a lack of trust with our with the market and with our businesses. But the way that we actually get ahead of these things, how we can take our data to the cloud, how we can ensure we can protect it and provide the appropriate policy and meet regulatory requirements, is through data catalogs. And it is not a surprise that top of the list is an investment in a data catalog, so that our data lakes don't have to come offline. As our data lakes ingest relevant information, that the metadata is captured, and understanding of that information is captured, the lineage of that information is captured, and it helps us to then, on the consumption side of information from the data lakes, better understand and interpret that information. We have stronger exploration and discovery capabilities so that we can tune the data to our own needs, creating that great data experience. So that when we think about this data catalog investment, I want you to have three things in mind and in determining what is going to make sense for your organization and getting a hold of your data. One is, it's all about understanding that data. Data catalogs need to have that strong discovery and profiling capability that brings data into context of who's going to use it, but also helps your governance teams and your data management teams better understand, interpret, and manage that information appropriately, so that you don't have the disconnects between where data is sitting within your lakes and your cloud environments and how it's going to be utilized. So it's capturing definitions. How do you define a customer? How do you define your products? How do you define financial and location information? What is that definition in context of your own business nomenclature? How do you standardize that information globally for your organization, but also from a nuanced perspective that is much more in context? The definition of a customer and that standard in marketing generally revolves around, who do you have as a personal relationship with? In sales, it's generally a customer based off of account information. If you're in the insurance industry, you're thinking about customers in terms of policies. And from that perspective, you want to think about how do you action against the data, and that is going to be determined by the policies that you put into place that determines what is the business logic and business rules that allow you to shift and morph data appropriately to your activities so that it is personalized and you can activate it for value. And then lastly, working with data is a collaborative process. Nobody just sits in their offices and their cubes and their desks in their businesses and never talks to anybody all day long. We all engage with each other to lift our ability to perform for the business better. We work as a team, we meet together, we share information, and data catalogs need to also enable those business processes of collaboration and sharing, because insights sitting within the head and the minds of individual employees does not benefit the broader good of the organization. You want to be able to democratize these insights. You want to be able to challenge what the data is saying, and you also want to be able to challenge yourself with what the data tells you about your business. So the interface and the experience of the catalog should be enabling this. So with that, what I'm going to do is pass it over to Amy, and she's going to help, further clarify what the total economic impact is of a data catalog for your organization.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Total Economic Impact portion of today's webinar, and it's a pleasure to be here to walk you through the findings of this Total Economic Impact study that we performed with IoTahoe. Again, my name's Amy Harrison, a Total Economic Impact, or TEI for short, consultant at Forrester, and also the project director for this case study with IoTahoe. So in the next 30 minutes, I'll tell you what we heard from the IoTahoe customer we interviewed, walk you through the analysis, and then give you a framework so that you can apply the same analytical recipe to your own organization. We'll discuss the case for an investment decision focused on IoTahoe and recap the results of a financial model we built based on the interviews and feedback from one existing IoTahoe customer. Now, before that, I'd like to set the stage and quickly just discuss a little bit about exactly what TEI is. So you may be asking yourself, how do business case studies help to evaluate technology? We built the TEI methodology over 20 years ago because Forrester found that over 90% of IT decision makers in North American enterprises found value in a business case study. We can all agree that a business case study is pretty important, and when making decisions on tech investments, the question then becomes, what kind of business case study? Because they do vary quite a bit in quality. Forrester's TEI methodology is very comprehensive. So most methodologies look at costs and benefits, but few other methodologies look at risk, and none of them look at flexibility and future options. So these are the four major components of Forrester's TEI methodology: benefits, costs, flexibility, and risk. The risk component of the TEI methodology is where we mathematically remove the rose-colored glasses. We pressure test our assumptions and calculations, and this means we decrease the benefit numbers and we increase the cost numbers to make financial analysis conservative and defensible. We vary those adjustments for the different categories of benefits and costs, and we also base that on what we hear from the customers. Flexibility in the TEI case study doesn't mean faster, better, cheaper, because that's covered in the costs and benefits, but instead it refers to the opportunities or options that a technology investment today may produce for an organization at some point in the future. So whether or not an organization eventually exercises those options, the options do represent value for the buyer over and above the immediate benefits of that technology. So they provide the organization with a more flexible roadmap to do their future efforts. So to summarize, those are the four legs of the TEI table: benefits, costs, flexibility, and risk. And the TEI framework provides you with a realistic and rather conservative picture of the investment to help in making a better, more confident decision. So on this slide we're showing right here, we're going to talk about the steps that we took to perform this case study. We began with a look at our existing research as well as interviews with the IoTahoe subject matter experts in order to fully understand the value proposition of their platform. Then we conducted 2 interviews with the same IoTahoe customer to understand their experiences with the solution and the impact that it had on their organization. Then we took a look at all of that data and we constructed a representative financial model based upon the data we received during the customer interview process to provide organizations a way to measure and evaluate the financial impact of investing in the solution. And then finally, we wrote up the findings into a case study that presents both the numerical analysis, but also the color behind it, sharing the stories of the interviewed customers. So before I share those findings, I have to go through a few disclosures. So the key points here are that this webinar is an abridged version of the case study. We strongly encourage you to read the full case study. The case study is commissioned by IoTahoe, but Forrester retains editorial control as this is an objective third-party study of the IoTahoe platform and does not imply endorsement of IoTahoe. Lastly, you should know that your own mileage may vary. So we recommend that you use the framework described in the case study to determine the appropriateness and the potential impact of IoTahoe and that investment for your own organization. So now that we have that covered, let's take a look at the high-level results we found. So Michele told us earlier that customers often struggle with their big data investments, and over 1/3 of customers eventually shut down their data lakes. What was so exciting here is that the opposite happened. The customer we interviewed had a comprehensive data strategy and had previously invested millions of dollars into their data lake efforts. While the data lake provided them with an immense amount of information under one roof, they had lost the relationship linkages that existed in the hundreds of enterprise systems that they had within their organization. After working with IoTahoe, the organization was able to recreate those relationships and use them to drive meaningful business insights. I think this quote from the VP of Data and Analytics we interviewed articulates it well. He said, "We had this vision of bringing the data together, modeling it in a consistent way so that we could drive the analytics from it in order to do causal analysis and forecasting work. But we found ourselves in a place where we really just couldn't scale to our overall aspirations without some help." Their chief data officer emphasized these points as well. He set appropriate expectations, however, with his leadership, that they would need time to drive sustainable change, but that they were building a foundation to change the data culture in an action-oriented way. So now for the big reveal. This slide really captures the results of the case study. Through our interviews, we found that IoTahoe, financially speaking, has a return on investment for the 3-year analysis of 523%, a present value of $17 million, and a net present value of $14 million. IoTahoe helps organizations achieve these results by enabling them to leverage AI and machine learning technologies to execute on their data strategies. But now I want to jump into some of the details of this analysis so that you can really understand where we got those numbers and how we reached these conclusions. So for this study, Forrester conducted in-depth interviews with the Chief Data Officer and the VP of Data and Analytics from the same IoTahoe customer to understand their investment decision and their experience with IoTahoe. It was really great to get perspectives from different altitude levels within the organization. So the customer is complex. They're a multinational manufacturer with over 100 billion in revenue. You'll see that this case study lays out the use case for Io-Tahoe in their finance organization. And really, to say they're a complex organization is an understatement. So they've had 2 full years using the Io-Tahoe product. And prior to working with Io-Tahoe, as I mentioned, they had made major investments in creating their data lake. So we talked with them about their experiences before and after Io-Tahoe. We heard 3 key reasons why they invested in Io-Tahoe. First, they had a comprehensive data strategy that began with that creation of the data lake. They wanted to get their data under one roof instead of their employees needing to find data from multiple disparate systems. We previously mentioned they lost the context of the business transaction when it moved away from the ERP systems, for example. Before working with Io-Tahoe, they tried to address this by throwing, quote, bodies at the problem. With tens of thousands of relationships to discover, one transaction could have taken them anywhere from 12 to 13 weeks to discover, they told us. Second, this idea of headlights, not taillights. This is the way their chief data officer described their philosophy. He said, "We're helping people move to this era of forward-looking analytics. Historically, people in our organization have focused a lot on what has happened in the past." He called it taillight analytics. Now they want to understand what will happen in the future and how they can control it. So he described this as an example. If supplier terms are net 60 days, that really has a material impact on cash flow. This work gives them the ability to understand across the business how many other suppliers with 60-day terms there are. If the dashboard they created shows that there are 42 requisitions opened with the supplier right now, you want to negotiate that with them while you still can. This allows them more control over the business. Third, compliance. GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, and many more standards. As a multinational corporation, they must be prepared for these and more standards surely to come at them. The organization looked for a provider who was able to handle the complexity of their needs. They found that while no other vendor had exactly what they were looking for out of the box, Io-Tahoe was a very willing partner who had a strong foundational technology. Io-Tahoe was quickly able to understand the organization's use cases and gain some quick wins from even their most gnarly problems. As a result, the customer and Io-Tahoe worked together to achieve the outcomes they were looking for. First, the organization's data strategy was to build this foundation that leverages machine learning technologies and expand its use so that they are able to predict outcomes, such as the cash flow example I mentioned earlier. They were able to move to a much more action-oriented data paradigm. And second, they successfully were able to deliver on the promise that big data holds by leveraging the reports enabled by Io-Tahoe and the analysis performed by the business. In the case study, you'll find lots of customer quotes, but let's walk through a few of their comments about those key results. The first quote is really about this idea of relationship discovery. The more time data scientists spend on higher value activities like building algorithms, the more value for the business. The second quote was a reflection of the great relationships the Io-Tahoe team built with the client. So here's a visual on the key results. I'll explain what's behind each of these calculations, but let's note, this does not mean that every Io-Tahoe customer will have all of these same benefits, or if they do, that the magnitude of these benefits would be the same. However, the case study has detailed information about the assumptions used in the calculations and the factors that may affect your own organization's outcomes. So now let's take a deeper look at each of these benefits. This first benefit is the time saved by FP&A professionals when performing their reporting and analysis duties. So by using IoTahoe, these finance professionals no longer needed to log into 4 different data warehouses to access historic data. FP&A teams were spending 90% of their time chasing what's happened and only 10% of their time conducting analysis. By utilizing the relationships discovered by IoTahoe, the FP&A teams were able to reduce time spent researching historical data by 20 to 30%. They were able to use that time to analyze transactions and deliver accurate forecast data. Now, I don't want to bog down our conversation with too many details on numbers and calculations, and you can dig into more of the specifics in the full case study. But to give you an idea of how we calculate this out, let's walk through the boxes on this slide. So we understood that there were 8,000 finance professionals with an average fully loaded salary of $81,000 per year. They told us the finance professionals experienced a time savings of 20 to 30% because they no longer had to log into multiple systems to find data. But to be conservative, Forrester calculated a 20% reduction. We assigned 10% of the overall efficiency gain directly to the impact of the reports enabled by IoTahoe and what that brings to the process. And as a matter of best practice when creating these models, Forrester reclaims 50% of the productivity derived here. The reason for this is because not all of that newfound time is spent doing more finance work. People maybe don't have to work overtime, they take water breaks, they're able to go on vacation, for example. Finally, we risk adjust these numbers down by 20% to account for factors such as, not all organizations have the same level of complexity as our interviewed customer, for example. So this resulted in a 3-year net present value of $12.9 million productivity gain. Let's examine the next benefit. Data architects building data relationships. So after utilizing IoTahoe's relationship discovery, the organization was able to create a lean center of excellence, reducing the number of data architects working on this project from 15 to 3. So to calculate this 3-year, $3.5 million benefit, we calculated the average fully loaded salary of a data architect at $130,000 per year. We took the total salaries for the 12 redeployed data architects and then risk adjusted that by 20% to account for a variability in total compensation. So for the third benefit, reduction in reconciliation costs, let's talk a little bit about this. So intercompany accountants and treasury operations analysts at the interviewed organization are responsible for providing detailed reconciliation around financial transactions. This results in billions of dollars of activity processed through complex transactional systems and processes. The VP of Data and Analytics explained to us that this team lives in the whole concept of transaction and reconciliation. They prove every transaction processed on the ERP arrives at the bank, they show how it was applied, and how it was processed back into the ERP. And as he put it, this process is the life of an army of people every day, all day. So to calculate this, we took the 440,000 reconciliations per year they perform at a cost of $52.50 per transaction. So that number was reported to us by the customer. So of that 440,000 transactions, 45 were exempted from this process due to policy changes they had. But through the work with IoTahoe, they were able to digitize 27% of the transaction reconciliations enabled by IoTahoe. So IoTahoe is part of the ecosystem here. The relationships discovered by the platform are used in reporting and analysis. So because of this, Forrester assigns 10% of the overall efficiency gained directly to the impact that IoTahoe brings to the process. So to account for these risks, Forrester adjusted this benefit downward by 10%, which resulted in a 3-year risk-adjusted total present value of $628,175. So we should note the interviewees pointed out that these transactions were very high value for them. The VP of Data and Analytics told us that the transactions that benefit IoTahoe are the most expensive to perform because they require detailed transactional analytics and association. So while this might not have been the highest dollar value benefit, it was incredibly valuable for them. So in addition to the benefits we were able to quantify, the benefits, so this case study focuses on quantifying the benefits that the IoTahoe customer described. We also heard some compelling benefits that weren't readily quantified. Many of these benefits I'm going to describe were extremely high value for the customer, but we didn't feel confident adding them into the overall ROI because we didn't have all the dimensions required to come up with a credible financial number. So let's go through these. First, the Chief Data Officer told us that with the combination of the efforts from the Data Lake project combined with the data discovery capabilities from IoTahoe, this allowed the organization to retire 36 data warehouses. They reported that this was the combination of these efforts. This saved them over $30 million. Next, reduced time for data scientists to prepare data. One of the primary drivers for working with IoTahoe was to aid the data science organization in automating its data prep work, enabling more time spent on analysis. The Chief Data Officer reported that typically data scientists spend 50 to 60% of their time just learning about the data and only 20% of their time building algorithms. They leveraged IoTahoe's AI and ML capabilities to automate data scientists' work so that they could transition to higher value work, such as creating algorithms. Improved visibility in analytics. At the interviewed organization, purchase requests, orders, invoices, and cash payments are all made in separate systems. The organization uses the IoTahoe platform to discover, link, and categorize transactions. This has allowed data scientists to use a consistent, efficient approach to producing accurate cash forecasting across thousands of procurements. And this has a material impact on the business by understanding the usage and the timing of cash throughout the enterprise. Finally, improved accountability in supplier discount terms. So this was a really exciting one. Savvy finance organizations hold payment for as long as possible to improve their cash position, leveraging negotiated prepayment discounts. If payment is not made on time, the organization loses money because it potentially falls into a lower discount cycle. Given the magnitude of the interviewed organization, it is not humanly possible to discover and maintain the full life cycle of a transaction, resulting in a missed discount capture. If they don't pay in the negotiated 15 days for a 10% discount, for example, they could fall into a lower discount bracket and potentially lose that 10%. So in a $100 billion organization, this is quite a substantial amount of money. In addition, The organization was not able to produce data that provided direct accountability to the managers of the supplier relationships. The CDO reported to us, if I can stitch the whole life cycle of a transaction, I can cleanly link payments to the commodities. Now we can drive much more accountability to the managers who have a direct relationship with the suppliers. But it all stems from the same base concept of being able to link data in ways that we weren't able to before. So now let's think about costs. So to come up with the economic results, we need to think about the cost side of the equation. And there are really two categories of costs for bringing IoTahoe into an organization. Those costs vary for each implementation, and the case study has details about what determines each of these costs. So this describes both the fees for the initial deployment and the ongoing fees for the team running the data discovery project, and the ongoing costs for the cloud services as used as part of the project. As I mentioned earlier, flexibility in the TEI case study means the ability to engage in future initiatives, but not the obligation to do so. So by implementing IoTahoe, a customer creates the possibility of additional uses and business opportunities in the future. The IoTahoe customers described several kinds of flexibility or future benefit that they gain or expect to gain. So first, expanded use cases. The finance use case described in this study is where the organization began its use of IoTahoe. However, they're planning and implementing big data technologies across other use cases that require data discovery and compliance. And we'll talk a little bit more about compliance coming up. Reduced spend on auditors. The client told us they spend around $50 million in auditing fees because auditors need to travel to several locations to collect data on site. Because of the reporting enabled by IoTahoe, 25% of the audit professionals are now able to log in from a centralized platform. We weren't able to quantify this yet because the CDO didn't have numbers back from the business, but he said for next year's budget, they expect to reduce audit fees by a significant number. So fewer business disruptions. So the organization described to us a scenario where a critical supplier went unpaid and parts were not shipped. As a result, they had to use secondary suppliers who were more expensive and they experienced shipment delays. So having a clear visibility into the transaction lifecycle ensures that payments are indeed made and they can proceed business as usual. Compliance. So GDPR is just one compliance use case. Enterprises today must react to a constantly changing regulatory client, such as CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. Given the intersection of personal and financial data, the Chief Data Officer plans to use IoTahoe's PII and sensitive data discovery capabilities to proactively manage data and protect sensitive information. He told us that while today we use IoTahoe for discovering things about our data, their goal is to use IoTahoe to monitor the things they've discovered. He wants to ensure they're meeting new compliance regulations and that the integrity and consistency of the data holds up over time. So as you can see from the quote here, the CDO said that by using IoTahoe, they are 90% more compliant if he was trying to do this with humans. So the last piece of the methodology that we use is risk. We think about this as the potential risk factors which may contribute to an organization not experiencing the same benefits. Potential factors that could change the outcome for another business might include the number of use cases, the number of users, the need to comply with certain regulatory environments, or different costs based on geographic region. So because of these potential risks, we decrease the value of each benefit. So wrapping up, we'll provide a different visual on the math behind this case study. You saw these numbers earlier, and now you know how we got them. From those benefits and costs that I described, the risk-adjusted ROI and NPV values that you see here are determined by applying risk adjustment factors to the results for each benefit and cost. So to determine the present value of benefits and costs, Forrester then applies a 10% yearly discount rate. So as I mentioned, you'll find lots more detail on all of these calculations in the case study. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your attendance and your attention. And I'm going to turn this over to Oksana and Rohit from Io-Tahoe for their portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Michelle and Amy, for providing this overview. This is Oksana Sokolovsky, CEO and co-founder of the IoTahoe Smart Discovery and Catalog product. We wanted to spend a few minutes with you talking to you about IoTahoe and giving you a sense of what the product is about. IoTahoe is an enterprise smart data discovery and search capability that allows organizations to discover data relationships in a complicated and complex heterogeneous landscape. It allows the organizations to improve data management, data governance, and meet regulatory compliance. It allows the business to understand data without having to do complicated data discovery on their own and leverage AI-based smart discovery that IoTahoe has. Additionally, we also have a data catalog that allows the organization to actually have a view of all of the data assets in a single location and manage these assets going forward. As you will see, we have several features in our product that allow to discover the relationships and have the organization understand how data flows through the enterprise, how sensitive data flows through the enterprise, discover PIIs, and conduct impact analysis of how data changes over time. Additionally, IoTahoe allows the organization to get a view of the redundant data, thus allowing it to create an accurate view of the real data versus the data that may be repeated. Finally, we have data catalog that brings it all together and allows the organization to combine the business glossary with the data assets and create an organizational data governance process that enables the organization to manage its data assets just like it would manage any other assets. Moving forward, IoTahoe is a highly differentiated product. Our foundation is that we believe that a lot of data discovery can be automated. And as you've seen from the presentation before, the automation is at the root of the IoTahoe, allowing the organization or organizational experts to actually focus on insights that they discover from the data, not on the discovery itself. IoTahoe does the heavy lifting of the data discovery. We look at the data itself, not just metadata, which allows us to create better, more deeper insights into data relationship. We have 7 patents filed on our technology, which makes us unique and differentiated. Rohit will talk shortly about the technology itself. We actually span heterogeneous enterprise, covering relational and unstructured and structured data, allowing the organization to see the information across the enterprise, not just in data stores, but also as data may be moving through the organization. And then we also obviously enable non-technical users, which is very important, as you heard from the study before, non-technical users to be able to leverage the data findings without having to do technical work. I'll turn it over to Rohit, who's going to talk a little bit more about the differentiation.
Thank you, Oksana. Good day all, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Rohit Mahajan. I'm one of the co-founders with Oksana, and I manage the tech and product in Io-Tahoe. So I wanted to actually talk about the 5 founding principles of Io-Tahoe, which will call out a significant amount of differentiation from the competition. So number 1, and the core founding principle, is data, and only the data will give you the most accurate and the truest story. Hence, we at Io-Tahoe, we interrogate, investigate the data, and we brute force. We derive the insights by completely looking at the data, not just the meta. And that is a very significant differentiation from 90% plus competition out there. So that's the foundation philosophy number 1. Number 2, Io-Tahoe thinks, breeds, implements AI and ML, very practical usage and implementation across all of our feature sets. And that is where our core IP comes in. We have filed 7 patents pending approval. And the core differentiation there is our models are practical. That is ML models. They are repeatable and production ready across disparate client domains. They produce pretty high true positive results and pretty low amount of noise or false positive. So that's a second founding principle. The third is the scalability and the security itself. So Io-Tahoe does scale across the structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data sources, disparate data sources, in a pretty significant landscape and the client implementation. So it's highly scalable. Number 4, the deployment. The deployment is extremely easy when it comes to us deploying in the client environment. It is always deployed behind the firewall. Io-Tahoe never pulls a single bit out from the client firewall behind, and the deployment takes, in most of the cases, single-digit hours. We're talking a couple of hours, and Io-Tahoe gets deployed. It is a containerized deployment, pretty self-serve. So that was number 4, and number 5 is the UX UI, where we have enabled various end users. It could be tech users, could be business users, business analysts, data scientists, production ops, support folks. They have pretty simplistic UX UI from a usability perspective that they can leverage. So those are the 5 founding principles that Io-Tahoe has, which actually lets Io-Tahoe differentiate from the competition significantly. Discovery of the data across disparate sources in the highly automated and highly finely tuned leveraging ML algorithms is the key differentiation. So if you need to, I'll close by making a comment. Io-Tahoe, we have the vision that Io-Tahoe should be known for its core discovery and the search capability and a lot of other insights that Io-Tahoe provides as a result of the data-centric discovery. And that includes data cataloging, data lineage / data flows, data redundancy, sensitive data discovery, which is a compliance use case, and so on.
Rohit, thanks very much. Stick with me just for 1 second, if you don't mind. Something I have heard you say, and you just repeated it here, you need to discover the data before you can search it. Do you think that many companies don't understand what to us sounds like just a basic principle? Do they not get it?
So most of the clients and the organizations out there get it. I think the complexity is the systems, the software systems have been out there for the last 5, 10, 15 years. And we have organically grown as an industry. The data has grown, is growing significantly, as Michele mentioned in the opening statement. And there's this tribal knowledge, which is in people's experience. And it is a manual process to interrogate the data and derive the insights. Most of the organizations end up looking at the meta itself, the metadata, and try to derive the insights out of the meta. But we all know, we all have been around long enough to know that the meta is not something that's kept up to date and so on. And it's really what's input into their discovery. The results they get are subpar, if you would, by looking at just the meta. And that's what IoTahoe is out there to call out the significant amount of discovery that should be done by looking at the data itself. I have to admit it's quite painful exercise, but leveraging the automation and ML and AI is how we have made it pretty easy for the end user to get into those insights.
Sounds good, Rohit. Thanks very much. Hey, Amy, one quick question that came in, and that is, how does this TEI study, how can I apply it to my specific industry? I mean, you've talked about this multinational, but how do I make it make sense to me if I'm in one vertical or another?
Absolutely. So actually, I'll build on what Rohit said. You know, you have to discover the data before you can search it. This is a use case that really applies across all industries. So if we think about retail and we think about the scenario where a retailer has a huge supply chain that they deal with, or they have a robust customer database, it's really important that, you know, when all of these data points are ported into the data lake, that you're able to understand the history across these transactions. And this is really applicable across all industries. In addition, this idea of compliance. So, you know, data compliance is something that every organization has to deal with. So really, having the ability to utilize Io-Tahoe technology to be able to keep up with that level of compliance required really is applicable across multiple industries.
Sounds good. I want to thank everybody here. Amy Harrison, Michele Goetz from Forrester, thank you so much for joining us. Oksana Sokolovsky, Rohit Mahajan from IoTahoe, thank you as well. Now, quick point. If you're interested in getting a copy of this report, the full copy, it is available. If you go to www.io-tahoe.com, and it is downloadable for you. And we think that it's pretty good reading, and we think you get a lot out of it. Folks, thanks very much for joining us. Stay well.